and welcome to Daily Insights. If you like the show and you like what we do here and you want to support us the free symbol A, then you can do just that by hitting the subscribe and like buttons below. Thank you so much.
All right, so let's dive into this gold rush that seems to be happening.
Yeah.
Since late 2024, gold prices have been skyrocketing, and you'd think everybody would be jumping on board, right?
Right.
But here's the thing. It's not your average investor driving the surge.
What we're seeing is central banks around the world really going on a gold buying spree,
Oh, wow.
especially China. They're stockpiling gold like we haven't seen before, and it's a big shift,
Interesting.
especially for China, where gold has always been like this safe haven asset.
It's really interesting to see these big players making such a significant move.
Yeah.
And in December 2024 alone, China's central bank, they increased their gold reserves
Yeah.
to 73 million ounces, up from almost 73 million the month before. So, I mean, we're talking about a significant increase here.
Yeah, there's a lot of gold.
What could be the motivation behind this?
Well, one possible explanation is that China is maybe looking to diversify its reserves away from the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
So holding more gold could be their way of kind of preparing for a future where the yuan plays a more prominent role globally.
That's a really interesting point. If China is shifting away from the dollar, could that impact the value of the U.S. dollar?
It's certainly a possibility, but it's a very complex issue.
Of course.
Lots of factors involved.
So we've got China making these moves, but here's the twist.
Okay.
Even with gold prices going up, we're not seeing that same level of enthusiasm from everyday investors.
Right.
Why aren't they following the central bank's lead?
So there are a couple possible reasons for that.
Okay.
One is that a lot of retail investors, they might already be invested in gold.
Yeah.
They invested heavily in recent years, and they're just holding on to their investments.
You're like, I'm good.
Exactly. And then another factor could be the economic climate. A lot of people are having less disposable income just because of the economy, and that might be limiting their ability to invest in gold right now.
That makes sense. And we also can't forget the impact on coin shops with gold prices being so high. And those refining backlogs, it's getting tougher for them to even acquire and sell gold.
It's almost like this bottleneck in the system.
Totally. Now, there's one name that keeps popping up in all of this, Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary.
Oh, yeah.
Could he be the one behind this gold frenzy?
Well, Bessent's fondness for gold has been no secret, even back during his Senate confirmation hearings. He kind of hinted at liking gold.
Interesting.
And if you think about it, the U.S. has kept its gold valuation at $42 an ounce for decades.
$42 an ounce. That seems stuck in the past a little bit.
It does, doesn't it? So imagine if the U.S. decided to revalue its gold holdings to reflect like the current market price.
Oh, wow.
That would be a massive move.
Huge.
Especially with China buying up all this gold, it would definitely shift global perceptions of the U.S. dollar.
So let's talk about how this is impacting the mining industry. They must be doing well in this environment.
They are. We're expecting to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the mining sector this year.
Okay.
As companies try to capitalize on this bull market, it's a complete 180 from last year.
Oh, really?
Where they were like shedding assets.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to acquire all these gold deposits.
It sounds like they're trying to grab everything they can.
Yeah, but they're being a bit more cautious this time around.
That's good.
Learning from past mistakes. In the past, they focused too much on production growth.
Okay.
And they would overpay for assets. Now they're more focused on profitability and free cash flow generation.
So they're being strategic about it.
Exactly. They're looking for these big, profitable mines that fit their criteria, and those are becoming increasingly hard to find.
Wow. So it's not just about quantity anymore.
Nope. It's about quality and sustainability.
It sounds like they're trying to avoid making the same mistakes that happened during the 2011 gold bull market and the downturn that followed.
Exactly. Back then, companies prioritized production growth over profitability, and they ended up overpaying for assets. When the market cooled down, they struggled.
So this time they're being more selective.
Yeah, they're being more selective with acquisitions.
Okay.
Focusing on long-term value creation.
It's interesting how the industry is adapting.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have central banks hoarding gold, a cautious but optimistic mining industry, and a treasury secretary who seems to love gold.
Right.
But what about everyday investors? Is this something they should be considering?
Well, that's a question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah.
Gold has always been seen as a hedge against inflation and a safe haven asset.
Right.
But it's also a volatile asset.
Yeah.
The price can go up and down.
Makes sense.
And it doesn't generate any income.
Okay.
So, it's not a decision to be taken lightly.
So what are some key things listeners should consider if they are thinking about investing in gold?
I would say it's really important to understand your own financial goals, your risk tolerance, and your investment horizon. Don't jump on the bandwagon just because everyone else is.
Right.
Do your research, talk to a financial advisor, and make informed decisions that align with your circumstances.
All right, so good advice there. Now let's move on to another interesting development in this gold rush. You mentioned that retail demand seems to be lagging, but there are these reports of something interesting happening at the Bank of England.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
So there have been reports of a surge in gold withdrawal requests at the Bank of England.
Really?
And apparently all their delivery slots are fully booked.
Wow.
Which is really interesting because it's happening at the same time that the U.S. gold market is trading at a premium to the London market.
Wait, so you're saying that gold is more expensive in the U.S. right now?
Exactly. And this price difference has created a unique opportunity for anyone who has gold in London.
Okay.
They can withdraw their gold from the Bank of England, ship it to the U.S., and sell it for a profit.
So it's like a gold rush within a gold rush.
Yeah.
People are literally moving their gold across the Atlantic to make a profit.
It's incredible. It really shows how volatile and dynamic the gold market has become.
So this whole thing highlights another trend. We're seeing countries wanting to hold their gold domestically.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, we're seeing this shift away from globalization.
Okay.
Countries are focusing more on self-sufficiency and national security. They want to have their gold close at hand where they can control it.
So it's not just about having gold, it's about having direct access to it.
Exactly. And it makes sense when you think about the uncertainties in the world right now.
Yeah, with all the tension between the major world powers.
Yeah, it gives them a sense of security and autonomy.
This whole situation with the Bank of England and countries wanting to repatriate their gold, it really shows how important trust is in the financial system.
Definitely.
If people start doubting the system, it could have a ripple effect throughout the markets.
Trust is the foundation of any financial system.
Right.
If people lose confidence in the institutions that are supposed to protect their assets, it can create instability and panic.
Speaking of trust, there have been whispers questioning whether the Bank of England actually has all the gold it claims to have.
Oh, really?
What do you make of these concerns?
Well, the Bank of England has assured everyone that they have all the gold,
Okay.
that it's ready for delivery, but some people are still skeptical.
Understandably.
We're talking about massive quantities of gold, and there's this history of gold being leased, rehypothecated, and even double counted.
Double counted.
That's a little worrying.
Yeah, and without a full independent audit, it's hard to put everyone's fears to rest.
So even with their assurances, some people are worried that if they go to withdraw their gold, it might not be there.
Yeah, and that uncertainty can really contribute to anxiety in the market.
Right.
People are worried that if everyone suddenly wants their gold, the system might not be able to handle it.
It's like a big game of musical chairs.
Exactly. Everyone wants to make sure they have a seat when the music stops.
And that brings us back to this idea of a stress test,
Yeah.
This gold rush is revealing vulnerabilities in our financial system. It's exposing the cracks and forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how our financial system actually works.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got central banks buying up gold, a cautious but optimistic mining industry, and a U.S. Treasury Secretary who might be a gold bug.
Mm-hmm.
Retail investors are showing interest,
Yeah.
but there's still this cloud of uncertainty and anxiety hanging over the market.
Right.
One thing is clear, though, gold is back in the spotlight.
Oh, definitely. It's not a relic of the past anymore.
Yeah.
It's a powerful force that's challenging the dollar's dominance.
That's interesting.
It's making us rethink our ideas about money and value.
So is this just a temporary surge in interest?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Or are we seeing a fundamental shift in the global financial landscape?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a wild ride.
It sounds like we're just getting started.
I think so.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for part one of our deep dive into the gold rush. But don't worry, we've got a lot more to uncover, so stay tuned for part two, where we'll be exploring even more fascinating developments in this story.
Can't wait.
So grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and get ready to keep diving deep.
Sounds good.
We were just talking about countries wanting to have their gold right there at home.
Yeah.
It seems like it's driven by this concern over, where their gold is being stored.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a sign that maybe there's less trust in those traditional storage locations?
It's definitely part of it. With globalization kind of waning,
Okay.
countries are really starting to prioritize self-sufficiency and their national security.
Yeah.
They want to have their gold close by, where they can control it.
So it's not even just about having the gold, it's about having access.
Right. It's about control.
Yeah.
And, it makes sense when you consider all the uncertainty in the world right now.
With all the tension between the major world powers.
Exactly. It gives them a sense of security and autonomy.
This whole situation with the Bank of England and countries wanting to get their gold back, it really shows how important trust is in the financial system.
For sure.
If people lose faith in the system, things could get shaky.
Oh, absolutely. Trust is like the foundation of any financial system.
Right.
When people lose confidence in those institutions that are supposed to protect their assets, it can lead to instability, even panic.
Speaking of trust, there have been some, whispers out there.
Oh, yeah.
Questioning if the Bank of England actually has all the gold that they claim to have.
Really?
How do we address those concerns?
Well, the Bank of England, they've repeatedly said that they have the gold.
Okay.
That it's unencumbered and it's ready for delivery.
Okay.
But some people are still a little skeptical.
I mean, it's a lot of gold, right?
It is. We're talking about huge quantities of gold.
Right.
And there's this history, of gold being least rehypothecated, even double counted.
Double counted.
Yeah. So without a full independent audit, it's hard to really put everyone's fears to rest.
So even with their assurances, some people are still worried that if they go to withdraw their gold, it might not actually be there.
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And that uncertainty just adds to the anxiety in the market.
Right.
People worry that if a lot of people suddenly want their gold,
Yeah.
the system might not be able to handle it.
It's almost like this big game of musical chairs.
Exactly. Everyone wants to make sure they have a seat when the music stops.
That's a good way to put it. And it brings us back to this idea of a stress test. This gold rush is revealing those vulnerabilities in the system.
It's showing us those cracks.
Yeah.
Forcing us to confront some hard truths about how our financial system really works.
So let's kind of recap here.
Okay.
We've got central banks buying gold, a cautious but optimistic mining industry, a treasury secretary who seems to really like gold.
Yeah.
Retail investors are showing interest, but there's still this sense of uncertainty and anxiety kind of hanging over everything.
Yeah, it's a weird time.
But one thing is clear, gold is definitely back in the spotlight.
It is. It's not just some relic of the past.
Yeah.
It's this powerful force that's challenging the dollar's dominance.
Interesting. So is this just a temporary thing?
That's the question, isn't it?
Or are we seeing like a big fundamental shift in the global financial landscape?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a wild ride.
Yeah, it feels like we're just getting started.
I think we are.
So the big question is,
Yeah.
could this renewed interest in gold actually lead to a return to the gold standard?
That's a big debate.
Yeah.
A lot of people are talking about that.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
What would be some of the benefits and drawbacks of a gold standard?
Well, people who like the gold standard, they say that it would help control inflation and limit government spending. They think it would create a more stable, predictable monetary system.
That does sound appealing, especially with all the concerns about inflation right now.
But then you have the people who don't like the gold standard.
Right.
And they argue that it would stifle economic growth.
Okay.
Make it really hard for governments to deal with economic crises.
Interesting.
They think it would give too much power to gold producers.
Yeah.
And limit the flexibility of central banks.
It sounds like there are valid arguments on both sides.
There are.
Yeah?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
So it's a big decision.
Yeah.
With huge implications for the global economy.
Absolutely.
But let's bring this back to our listeners.
Okay.
What does this gold rush mean for their own financial decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. Gold has traditionally been seen as a hedge against inflation.
Right.
A store of value, a safe haven asset.
Yeah.
But it's also a volatile asset.
Right.
The price can go up and down, and it doesn't generate any income.
So it's not a guaranteed win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any investment decision should be made with a clear understanding of your own financial goals,
Yeah.
risk tolerance, and your investment horizon.
So it's important to talk to a financial advisor.
Definitely.
And make decisions that make sense for you.
Exactly. Don't just jump on the bandwagon because it seems like everyone else is doing it.
Do your research.
Right.
Make sure it's the right fit.
Yeah. And remember, diversification is key.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Spread that risk around.
Oh,
Build a portfolio that can weather the storms,
So now we've got all this happening with gold. But we also need to consider the Federal Reserve.
Right.
They've been trying to bring inflation under control.
Yeah. It's a tough job.
It's a delicate balancing act.
They're trying to control inflation without causing a recession.
Yeah.
If they raise interest rates too much, it could slow down the economy. But if they don't do enough, inflation could get out of control.
So their decisions have a big impact.
Huge impact on the economy, the markets,
Yeah.
and the price of gold.
It's like the whole world is watching.
Yeah, waiting to see what they'll do next.
But with all this talk about central banks and economics and global markets, it's easy to forget about the human side of this gold rush.
That's true.
Gold has such a long history.
It does.
It's been a symbol of wealth and power and prestige.
For centuries.
And even today, it still captures our imaginations.
It does. It's more than just a commodity.
It's like a story that's woven into the fabric of human civilization.
I like that. And this gold rush is adding a new chapter to that story.
So as we continue to navigate this gold rush,
Yeah.
there's another factor we need to consider.
What's that?
The whole idea that this is revealing vulnerabilities in the financial system.
Oh, right. Yeah. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the biggest vulnerabilities is the fact that we rely on fiat currencies, which aren't backed by anything physical, like gold.
Yeah.
This whole system really depends on trust.
Yeah.
Trust in governments and central banks.
And as we've seen, that trust can be pretty fragile.
It can. When people start to lose confidence in those fiat currencies,
Yeah.
they tend to turn to gold
Okay.
as a way to store their value.
Right.
That's why we see gold demand go up
Okay.
during times of uncertainty.
So this gold rush could be a sign that people are starting to have second thoughts about the current financial system?
It's possible.
Yeah.
The current system has been around for a while,
Yeah.
but it definitely has its flaws.
And this surge in gold prices could be a reflection of those concerns.
Yeah, like gold is making a comeback.
It's like gold is reasserting itself.
It is.
A major player.
Yeah, it's been around for thousands of years.
Right.
It's got this long history as a store of value.
Yeah.
Maybe we're shifting back towards a more diversified monetary system,
Okay.
one where gold has a bigger role.
Right. It's a fascinating thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the gold rush, I want to leave our listeners with this question.
What's that?
Could we be on the verge of a multipolar currency system
Interesting.
where gold actually plays a key role?
It's a great question to think about. The financial world is constantly changing.
Always evolving.
The future is full of possibilities.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so exciting.
For sure.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into gold.
It's been my pleasure.
We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little thought-provoking.
I hope so.
And to our listeners out there, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, keep diving deep. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Is this gold rush just a blip, or are we seeing a fundamental shift?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question.
If this is a long-term trend,
Right.
what does it mean for the average person out there? Someone who might be thinking about adding gold to their portfolio.
Well, it's tough to predict the future, But we can look at, historical trends
Yeah,
and what's happening in the market right now.
to get a better idea.
Yeah, to try and figure out what might be coming.
So what are some things our listeners should be paying attention to?
Okay, so one thing to watch is what central banks do with their gold reserves.
Okay.
If they keep buying at this rate,
Yeah.
it could mean we're moving away from the U.S. dollar.
Wow, that would be huge. How would that impact things like international trade or the value of the dollar?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But it could make currency markets more volatile
Okay.
and potentially weaken the dollar's purchasing power.
So it's something to keep an eye on. What else should we be watching?
We should also think about the global economy. If things slow down
Yeah.
or we go into a recession,
Mm-hmm.
it could impact demand for gold,
Right.
potentially lower prices.
So even though people see gold as a safe haven asset,
Yeah.
it's not totally immune to economic problems.
Exactly. And, it's important to remember that gold is volatile.
Mm-hmm.
Its price can be influenced by all sorts of things.
That makes sense. And, that brings us back to diversification.
Right.
You mentioned that investors shouldn't put all their eggs in one basket.
Definitely one of the most important principles of investing.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
Okay, so diversification basically means spreading your risk
Yeah.
across different asset classes,
Okay.
like stocks, bonds, real estate,
Mm-hmm.
and, yes, even gold.
So even if you're really optimistic about gold,
Right.
it shouldn't be the only thing you invest in.
Exactly. You want to diversify your portfolio so that if one investment does poorly,
Right.
it doesn't have a huge impact on your overall returns.
That's a really important point. Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we talked about before.
Okay.
This idea that the gold rush is highlighting some weaknesses in the financial system.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so one of the biggest weaknesses
Right.
is that our system relies on fiat currencies, which aren't backed by a physical asset like gold. So the whole thing is based on trust.
Yeah, trust in governments and central banks to manage things properly.
And as we saw with the Bank of England,
Right.
that trust can be really fragile.
It can. When people start to lose confidence in those fiat currencies,
Yeah,
they tend to turn to gold
okay.
because they see it as a more reliable store of value.
Makes sense. So this gold rush could be a sign that people are getting worried about the system.
It's definitely possible. The system we have now has been around for a long time,
Right.
but it has its problems.
And these rising gold prices might be reflecting those concerns.
Yeah, it's like gold is making a statement.
Yeah, it's like gold is back
It's reclaiming its place.
as a major player.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a shift
Yeah.
back to a more diversified system
Okay.
where gold is more important.
That's a fascinating idea. So to wrap up our deep dive into the gold rush, I want to leave everyone with this.
Okay.
Could we be seeing the start of a new global currency system? One where gold plays a much bigger role.
That's a great question to consider.
The financial world is always changing.
It is always evolving.
The future is full of possibilities.
Absolutely.
That's what makes it so interesting.
It does.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this deep dive into the world of gold has been informative
I hope so.
and thought-provoking for you.
Definitely.
And to all our listeners out there, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, keep diving deep.